The Grand Throne Hall of Valthene Prime held approximately 8,000 people, and every single one of them was watching Captain Marcus Webb, accept honors he wasn't entirely sure he deserved. The crystalline vaulted ceiling refracted light into patterns that made his healing injuries ache. And the formal dress uniform he'd been given for the ceremony was uncomfortable in ways his combat gear never managed. Empress Kelshera sat on her elevated throne, the seat of stars, they called it, carved from living crystal that supposedly grew from the planet's core. She wore the full imperial regalia, the crown of stars, robes that seemed to be made of woven light, and an expression of cool, distant authority that made her look carved from the same crystal as her throne. Marcus had met her exactly once before, 6 years ago at a diplomatic reception. She'd been Princess Kelshera then, third in line for succession, wearing simpler robes and asking sharp questions about human military doctrine while they both drank wine that tasted like fermented metal. They'd talked for 2 hours, genuine conversation, not diplomatic pleasantry, before her attendants had called her away to some royal obligation. Marcus had thought about that conversation for weeks afterward, about the intelligent princess with the sharp wit and sharper questions. Then his ship had rotated back to Earth, and life had continued. Now she was Empress, elevated 5 years ago after her mother's assassination, and Marcus was the officer being honored for destroying a weapons platform that would have obliterated 3 core Valthene worlds. The mission had succeeded. Half his crew hadn't survived it. Captain Marcus Webb, Kelshera's voice carried through the hall with that harmonic quality Valthene voices possessed. Your tactical brilliance and personal courage preserved billions of lives. Your willingness to sacrifice everything for strategic necessity exemplifies the highest ideals of service. Her long ears remained perfectly formal, locked in ceremonial position. The Valthene Empire recognizes your extraordinary valor. She descended from her throne, 3 meters down, everyone watching, and approached him directly. This was the highest honor she could grant, the Empress personally bestowing commendation rather than delegating to ministers. Marcus stood at formal attention while she recounted his actions with military precision. The desperate run through enemy fire, the decision to sacrifice the escort ships to reach the target, the manual override that cost him 2 fingers and nearly his life. When she finished, she placed the Star of Valthene around his neck, a medallion that weighed almost nothing but felt impossibly heavy. The Empire grants you title, land rights in the Viridian sector, wealth sufficient for 3 generations, and our eternal gratitude. Marcus spoke the formal response his diplomatic briefing had taught him. I accept these honors on behalf of my crew, your Imperial Majesty. Their sacrifice made victory possible. Kelshera's hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the medallion. Just for a moment. So briefly that Marcus thought he imagined it. Then her expression returned to that imperial distance, and she ascended back to her throne. The ceremony concluded with traditional formality. Marcus was escorted away by palace officials while the court erupted into controlled applause. He didn't look back, but he felt her eyes following him. Or maybe he imagined that too. Marcus was reviewing his departure schedule, leaving tomorrow, returning to Earth for reassignment, when a royal attendant appeared at his guest quarters. The attendant was young, nervous, and spoke with the careful precision of someone delivering a message they'd been ordered to memorize exactly. Her Imperial Majesty requests your presence. Private audience. Immediately, all recording devices are disabled. This conversation will not appear in court records. Marcus followed the attendant through corridors that grew progressively less grand until they reached a small chamber overlooking the capital. Kelshera stood by the window, still wearing her formal regalia but with her long ears finally relaxed from their ceremonial rigidity. She didn't turn when Marcus entered. Close the door, she said quietly. What I'm about to tell you is not for any record, any report, any courtier's ears. Marcus closed the door and waited. Kelshera was silent for a long moment, her reflection in the window showing an expression nothing like the distant empress from the throne room. You saved my empire, she said finally. 3 core worlds, billions of lives, preserved because you made impossible decisions and survived by sheer stubborn will. Her voice was controlled but strained. I granted you every honor I possess authority to give. Titles, land, wealth, recognition before the entire court. Everything appropriate for such extraordinary service. She turned, and Marcus saw vulnerability in her expression that the throne room ceremony had completely hidden. Yet there is one thing I wish I could have granted instead. One reward more valuable than all the others combined. Her long ears lowered in what Marcus's briefing materials had said indicated profound sorrow or regret. And that reward was lost 5 years ago, long before you ever stepped foot in my throne room. 6 years ago, Kelshara continued, moving away from the window, I attended a diplomatic reception. Tedious affair, mostly. But I met a human officer who actually understood military doctrine instead of just parroting academy teachings. We drank terrible wine and talked about tactical theory and cultural differences. He made me laugh at protocols I'd been trained to revere since childhood. Her eyes, those distant imperial eyes from the ceremony, now held desperate honesty. For 2 hours, I wasn't Princess Kelshara performing diplomatic obligations. I was simply Kale, talking to someone interesting who saw me instead of my title. It was the most genuine conversation I'd had in years, perhaps ever. Marcus's heart rate increased. He remembered that reception, remembered the sharp-eyed princess who'd asked questions that actually challenged him. Then my attendants called me away, Kale continued. Some royal obligation I don't even remember now. I thought perhaps when our ships were next in the same system, I might find him again. See if that connection was real or just diplomatic fantasy and bad wine. She laughed bitterly. 3 months later, my mother and older sister were assassinated. My brother died stopping the conspirators. I was elevated to empress at age 27, and every moment of my life became statecraft. Every relationship became political calculation. Every private thought became state secret. Kelshara stopped directly in front of Marcus. And then you appeared in my throne room today, wearing captain's insignia and medals for saving my empire, and I realized, her voice cracked slightly, I realized that the human officer I once met, the one I thought about finding again, is now the hero I must formally reward, while 8,000 courtiers watch every gesture and analyze every word. Her long ears flattened completely against her skull, an expression Marcus's briefing had said indicated the deepest Valthine grief. You should have been mine first, Captain Webb, before I was empress, before you were hero, before duty and position made anything personal impossible. I should have found you again 3 months after that reception, instead of spending 5 years becoming something that can't afford genuine connections. Marcus stared at her, his mind racing through implications, through diplomatic protocols, through the devastating timing of everything. Your Majesty, Kale, she interrupted. For these few private moments, I am simply Kale. As I was that night 6 years ago when we talked about orbital bombardment tactics and laughed about cultural misunderstandings, and I felt like a person instead of a princess. Kale, Marcus said quietly, and watched something in her expression soften at hearing her name without the title. I remember that reception. I remember thinking I'd met someone extraordinary. Then you were gone, called away to whatever obligations princesses have, and I thought I'd imagined the connection. That it was just polite diplomatic interaction and too much bad wine making me think it was more. It was more, Kale said intensely. At least it felt like more. But now we'll never know what it might have become because I am empress and you are hero, and the distance between our positions is unbridgeable. She took a breath, composing herself with visible effort. So I granted you formal rewards today, Captain Webb, honors and titles and wealth, everything appropriate and correct for saving an empire. But know that what I truly wish I could have given you, what I wish I could have discovered 6 years ago before my mother died and duty consumed everything, is myself. Without the throne, without the ceremony, without the 8,000 witnesses, just Kale and Marcus, discovering if that connection was as real as I remember. Marcus felt the weight of her words, of the timing that had destroyed something before it could begin. This moment, he said carefully, right now. This is the only space where such honesty can exist, isn't it? Yes. Kale's voice was barely a whisper. The only moment. Tomorrow you leave for Earth. I return to being empress. The opportunity that should have existed 6 years ago will be completely, permanently lost. Then let me be honest too, Marcus said. That reception, those 2 hours, I didn't imagine the connection. I thought about you for months. wondered if our ships would cross paths again, hoped they would. Then time passed and duty happened and I convinced myself it had been nothing. Kale's long ears lifted slightly, hope, maybe, or perhaps just gratitude for honesty. But it wasn't nothing. No, it wasn't nothing. It was two people who might have discovered something extraordinary if timing had been different, if your mother hadn't died, if duty hadn't consumed you, if I hadn't become someone whose service you must formally recognize while an entire empire watches. If I could have found you 3 months after that reception instead of 5 years later, Kale added quietly. If I'd been brave enough to actually seek you out before everything changed. But I wasn't, and timing destroyed what might have been. They stood in silence, the weight of missed opportunity hanging between them. Finally, Kale straightened, and Marcus watched her transform back into Empress, the vulnerability retreating, the imperial mask sliding into place. You leave tomorrow, she said, voice formal again. Return to Earth. Accept your next assignment. Know that you have the Empire's eternal gratitude for your service. She paused, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. And know, though it cannot be spoken publicly or recorded officially, that you also have something far more personal. The regret of an empress who wishes desperately she'd met you as woman first, ruler second. Who granted you formal rewards today while wishing she could have offered something entirely different 6 years ago. Marcus bowed, proper and correct. Thank you, your imperial majesty, for the honors, and for the truth, both matter more than you know. Captain Webb, Kale said as he reached the door, her voice stopped him. If circumstances were different, if I were not Empress, if you were not hero, if duty didn't stand between us, would you have wanted to discover if that connection was real? Marcus turned and met her eyes, seeing Kale instead of Empress Kelshera. Yes, without hesitation, without doubt. Her expression held profound sorrow and perhaps the smallest hint of peace. Then we both know what timing stole from us. Perhaps that knowledge, painful as it is enough. To know it was real. To know it might have been something extraordinary. To know we will both carry this regret forward, separately, into whatever comes next. Marcus left the private chamber and returned to his quarters, the formal medals and titles feeling weightless compared to the weight of Kale's truth. He lay awake most of the night, thinking about 2 hours 6 years ago, about terrible wine and good conversation, about a connection that timing had destroyed before it could become anything. The next morning, he departed Valthine's space on a transport ship, carrying honors and wealth and the knowledge that somewhere in an imperial palace, an empress sat on a crystalline throne wishing desperately she'd met him differently. The formal ceremony made galactic news. Captain Marcus Webb, honored by Empress Kelshera for extraordinary valor. Titles granted, wealth bestowed, empire saved. The imagery was magnificent. The distant, regal empress and the humble, heroic captain. Perfect diplomatic theater. The private audience remained private. No recordings, no witnesses, no court records. Just two people acknowledging what might have been if timing had been kinder, if duty hadn't intervened, if connection could have been explored before positions made it impossible. Years later, when asked about his time at the Valthine court, Marcus spoke of the formal ceremony, the magnificent honors, the empire's gratitude. He never mentioned the private chamber, never spoke of the empress who revealed that the greatest reward she wished she could grant was the chance to have known him before everything made it impossible. That truth stayed locked away, too personal for public consumption, too painful for casual conversation. The connection that timing destroyed, the possibility that might have been something extraordinary, and the quiet murmur that haunted them both across the distance duty imposed, you should have been mine first. Marcus kept the medallion, accepted the land rights he'd never use and the wealth he'd donate to his crew's families. He served another 15 years before retiring, and in all that time, he never returned to Valthine space. Some distances, once established, were too painful to cross. Empress Kelshera ruled for 43 years with brilliant efficiency and cold competence. She never married, citing duty and the complexities of dynastic politics. Court historians noted that she kept a small private chamber overlooking the capital, rarely used for official business, where she would sometimes spend evenings alone. Neither ever spoke publicly of a diplomatic reception 6 years before a ceremony, of 2 hours of genuine conversation, of a connection that might have been something extraordinary if timing and duty hadn't intervened. but they both remembered. And in their separate ways, they both carried forward the same quiet regret, not for what was, but for what